Shalom, everyone, and welcome to the breakout session, Why Jewish Education Must Be Renewed and How We Can Raise a New Generation. I'm Joel Swedlove, the director of the Maccabi Sports Camp here at the Oshman Family JCC. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm proud to support the Z3 team. We are so glad that you all are here and still here at this point in the day. Before we begin, I want to remind you all of what makes these conversations distinctly Z3. Our work is grounded in three core principles: unity, not uniformity. We aim to honor our differences while working for the oneness of all of the Jewish people. Engaging as equal partners. We bring together Israelis and diaspora Jews to build a common future. And finally, our diversity of voices. We convene Zionists of different backgrounds and perspectives across political and religious lines. You may hear ideas that challenge your own, and that's by design. These sessions aren't about agreement, but about encounter, listening, deeply engaging, respectfully, and widening our shared understanding. With that, please join me in welcoming our moderator and panelists.
Thank you. So I hope it's on. Can you hear me? Good. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor to be here today at the Z3 conference. We came together to explore one of the most important challenges of our time: renewing Jewish education for the new generation. I'm Sharona Israeli-Roth, President and Executive Director of Early J, a Jewish early childhood initiative where we are investing and planting the seeds for the future of the Jewish people. Education has always been at the heart of Jewish life. Yet, today we face unprecedented social and cultural changes. Educators are stretched thin, parents are navigating complex choices, and Jewish and Zionist literacy are struggling to keep pace. Today we have an extraordinary panel that will introduce themselves in a few minutes. We will explore how we can reimagine learning, belonging, and leadership so that we can inspire a generation of engaged, ethical, and curious Jewish learners. But before we even start, we just want to know who is in the room. So if you, by clapping or by raising your hand, if you are from Jewish early childhood education, raise your hand or clap. If you are from a day school, or your family is from a day school. Any high schooler lovers here or supporters? If you're a parent? If you're from the world of philanthropy that support Jewish life, please let us know that you are here.
Yeah.
Exactly. As we hear from our panelists, I invite you to think about one idea or action you can take with you from this conversation, something that will help you bring this vision of renewed Jewish education to life in your own community. With that, let's dive in. Are you guys ready? Yeah. So thank you for answering us. Panelists, could you please introduce yourself in a few sentences and describe Jewish education in your own perspective? Sivan, why don't you start first?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sivan Zakai. I'm a professor of Jewish education at the Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles. And I research how young Jews ages 3 to 18 learn, think, and feel about Israel. Do you want me to answer the other question now?
Yeah, please.
Okay. To me, the purpose of Jewish education is to help Jewish learners, in this case, young people, make reasonable and informed choices about the kinds of Jewish lives that they would like to lead. And in order to do that, they need to know about the rich wealth of Jewish tradition and the customs of the Jewish people so that they can make those choices going forward and in the present moment.
Thank you. Danny, will you introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Danny Lehmann. I'm the head of school at the Gideon Hauser Jewish Day School here in Palo Alto, just down the road. Previously, I served as the founding head of Gann Academy, the new Jewish high school of Greater Boston, and following that became the president of Hebrew College, in Newton, Massachusetts, outside Boston. As a part of that, I was a co-founder of the Hevruta Gap-year Program at the Shalom Hartman Institute. I started a Jewish summer program for high school kids called the Berkshire Institute for Music and Arts. And I was also president of the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. Jewish education for me is about giving folks the tools to be able to live meaningful, connected Jewish lives with strong affinities for the Jewish people, the Jewish community, broadly speaking, and specifically to create meaningful connections, lifelong engagement with Israel, Israelis, and global Jewry. I think that takes a great deal of knowledge, immersive experiences. I believe strongly in Jewish day schools, in Jewish summer camps, in extensive Israel experiences for American and diaspora Jews, and increasingly find it important for Jews from Israel, the United States, and other Jewish communities around the world to learn together. And I think we have opportunities to enhance the sense of global connection among Jews by creating institutions that foster that connection.
Thank you. David, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name is David Breifman. I'm the CEO of the Jewish Education Project, which was formerly the Board of Jewish Education in New York. Around the time that little thing called COVID hit us, our organization pivoted, to use a much overused word, to become more national in our orientation, and we do a lot of work in the professional development and provision of educational resources for Jewish educators 0 through 18 across all educational settings, including some of the informal ones that Danny mentioned. You might have picked it up. Originally, I'm from Australia, not Brooklyn. And the purpose of Jewish education, in some ways, the answer to this question depends on my mood on any given day, or how much caffeine I have had beforehand. But I think I would say that today the purpose of Jewish education is to help, in my case, young Jews and their families to become better versions of themselves, to help strengthen the communities in which they live, and ultimately to help make the world a better place in which to live. Those three aspects: better version of self, communities being stronger, and the world a better place in which to live.
Thank you. So we will ask questions about the past, the present, and of course look at the future and what is our role. And each one of you has a role in this part, in this journey. What is a myth about Jewish education that we need to challenge or let go?
I can start.
Go ahead.
I think one of the myths, especially when it comes to Jewish day school education, is that somehow the study of Judaism, of Jewish texts, tradition, history, Hebrew language, somehow takes away from the development of students' general knowledge and development as human beings. And I think nothing is further from the truth. Studying a second language, especially one that gives them access to their own heritage and tradition, helps them develop all kinds of cognitive and intellectual skills. Jewish studies, as I've experienced it from TK through graduate school, is really about developing critical thinking skills, deep understanding, interpretation of texts, understanding of historical phenomena, movements, trajectories. All of that is about what it means to be a thoughtful human being. And in fact, what I've seen is that the Jewish part of education, especially when you're studying Judaism and general studies, actually complements and enhances their development across all of the different disciplines, whether it's math and science or history and literature. The skills that they develop are really integral to their development of the capacity to learn and to be lifelong learners, and obviously to engage in understanding their own tradition and identity. And so I think the myth that somehow if you're spending time studying this Jewish stuff, you're going to be handicapped when it comes to your development in these other crucial areas of your general education, I think it's absolutely wrong. And there's empirical evidence to suggest that that myth is wrong, because the students coming out of Jewish schools do fabulously well when they go on either to high school or to college. They have no problem, and in fact, in many ways, they're more advanced than other students because they have complementary skills that they've developed that actually enable them to develop as learners in ways that other students often can't.
Thank you. Sivan, do you want to talk about research a little bit in that field?
Yeah, so the myth I want to share with you is the idea that day school students know more about Israel-related current events than supplementary school students. And I want to be clear that I say this with deep respect for the work of day school educators and as a proud day school parent. I've been working for the last 2 years on a project called the Learning and Teaching About What Matters Project, which is an attempt to understand how young Jewish children, focused on 4th and 5th graders in particular, understand all sorts of contemporary events in the world and how their Jewish educators in both day schools and supplementary schools think about working with Jewish children to help them understand all of the things that are happening in our crazy world with a very fast-paced news cycle. And when we set out to do this research, we did not anticipate October 7th, but we were in schools as October 7th happened and in the 2 years since then. And we've been talking to kids in all sorts of different kinds of communities and all sorts of different kinds of schools. And one of the many things that we've learned is that in every kind of Jewish school, in day schools and in supplementary schools, there are high-resolution children who are paying very, very careful attention to the news as it unfolds. They are often reading headlines, seeking out information, even in the absence of adult guides. And those kinds of kids exist. I think of them as kind of mini policy wonk kids. They exist in day schools and they exist in supplementary schools. And there's another subset of children in both kinds of institutions who are broad brushstrokes kind of kids. They understand there was some bad stuff that happened on October 7th. They absolutely understand there was a war, there are hostages. All Jewish children that I have interviewed in the last 2 years know that. And beyond that, they don't really know that many details, and actually, they don't really want that many details because they want their Jewish spaces to be kind of more emotionally protective, and there's a lot of bad news. And so in both day schools and supplementary schools, we find kids who know a lot and kids who know some stuff. And in both day schools and supplementary schools, we find kids who deeply and desperately want their Jewish education to be the place where they get to think about world events as they unfold. And those kids often sit next to other kids in their same classrooms who say, there's so much bad news in the world. Can we just take a break? Could we maybe learn some Torah?
Any myth for you that you want to break?
Before I answer this question and go into the panel, I just want to make sure I say something which I think we all agree with, and that is I just want to thank all of the Jewish educators in this room.
Absolutely.
And I don't say this lightly. I say it for two reasons. One, the last 5 years has been crisis to crisis, and some of you have truly stepped up well beyond your initial job descriptions to do the work that the Jewish community needed you to do at that particular point in time. And as I often quip, not well, but you are some of the most undervalued resources and champions of the Jewish people, and you need to be fully acknowledged. The other reason I say that is because sometimes when we have a panel like this, we tend to critique some of what's taking place, and this is no reflection on you. It's a reflection in more ways of the systems around you, which in my experience, don't always allow educators to become the best versions of themselves for a whole lot of other reasons. And therefore, some of the things that we'll be talking about is nothing on the educators, but more on the structures around you. Look, the biggest myth for me is, and I don't say this lightly, is that somehow people believe that affordability is the biggest problem in Jewish education today. Don't get me wrong. Jewish education, by the way, Jewish life is too expensive, and if we believe in it as a people, we should be finding ways to make it accessible and affordable to everybody. But my myth is that if you believe that if all of a sudden we made Jewish education just affordable on a purely financial sense, that hundreds of thousands of more people would flock to our schools, our shuls, our summer camps, our youth movements, our Israel trips because of money alone, I think we are glossing over some of the fundamental issues which are at play, and that is going to be the through line of a lot of what I'll be talking about, and that is basically suggesting that the Jewish community and its educational infrastructures were built for a 20th century Jewry in North America, which actually no longer exists. And the demands of what 21st century Jewish life require of us requires in many cases, a total overhaul of many of the institutions that we've become too accustomed to over the last 50 to 60 years.
And this is exactly our next questions, is how have changes in Jewish life in Israel, America, and the diaspora shaped the educational models we rely on today? What do we have today? And then we'll talk about what we need to do to change it, believe me. But what do we have today?
Well, I want to challenge something that David said. I think the affordability issue, certainly when it comes to some of those really critical institutions, I mean, we know pretty much what works in terms of the development of committed, passionate Jews. We know that day schools work. We know the summer camps, residential summer camps work. We know that immersive, extensive Israel programs work. We know that. There's research that has confirmed that. And I do think that the cost of those things is an obstacle to participation. It's not necessarily the only thing, and it's not going to completely remove all of the inhibitors to people's participation. But I can tell you, as the head of a day school here in Palo Alto, with housing costs what they are, I could double the size of my school if the Jewish community decided that there were adequate funds to cut tuition for those who need it in half. And I think it's important to know, we have a budget about $14 million. We have 335 kids, TK through 8. The amount of money, and this is not, I mean, this is a critique, but take it for what it is. We get about $120,000 from the Jewish Federation out of a $14 million budget. Everything else we raise ourselves or parents pay through tuition, and much of the fundraising is done by parents who are currently in the school. So if the Jewish community decided that this kind of institution is critical and that we should really support expanding it, because there are people who want to come, who would come if it was at a different affordability point, we could have a significant impact on the amount of families. And it's not just kids. It's really important to understand. When people send their children to day schools, camps, and Israel programs, it has a significant impact on the entire family. And so I think there is an opportunity for the Jewish community, like in other countries. In other countries, the support of those kinds of institutions is much more significant and considered basic infrastructure for the Jewish community, such that you want to make it really accessible. And to the extent that we can make it more accessible, so it doesn't cost $40,000, $50,000, $60,000, for those who really could use a significant discount, for the Jewish community to decide that that's going to be critical to its future, I think that could have a very, very significant impact. So one of the structures that I think we're dealing with is the sense that Jewish institutions are private institutions that really have to rely completely, virtually completely, on their own resources in order to make it accessible to the broader Jewish community.
Daniel, what I want to ask you about it, as we support Jewish early childhood education, there is no, well, we're starting to have public in the age of 4 now, but parents need to send their kids somewhere before that. Not many of them are sending their kids, not in the Bay Area, not in Los Angeles that we support, to Jewish preschool. So they pay somewhere, but they're not necessarily paying Jewish.
So that, I think, has to do with how we communicate the quality of what we're doing. And I think there's a significant issue. That's part of the myth that I was also trying to respond to. I don't think that we have the sophistication to toot our own horns adequately. And I think there is a lot of myth out there about the kind of parochial nature of this kind of Jewish education, whether it's in early childhood or all the way through. And I think we have to find new ways to really share the kind of sophistication and broad nature to the education. The other thing I think we have to do is help people understand that when you have a deep dive into your particular heritage, you're actually able to foster a sense of the universal that's actually deeper and more powerful. And that we live in a culture in which there's a lot of shallow universalism. But when you have a strong identity in your own tradition, your own heritage, you're much more able actually to see the other person as having deep things to contribute and value in and of themselves.
David, what models do we have today that we probably need to change in the future?
Look, it's hard to say these things without disrespecting the very people that it's got nothing to do with you. The world is different. American Jewry this is one of the problems of being studying sociology means that data actually makes a difference, and you can actually find exceptions. And by the way, by virtue of the fact of who raised their hand in this room today, you are not normal in terms of Jewish educational experiences or belonging across the North American sector. But we look at that and we understand it. If I'm going to ask American Jews in general what matters to them most about being Jewish today, it's going to be just a different series of responses to what their parents and grandparents might have said. This is maybe too far off from this panel, but American Jews decided really early on that they wanted to be another religious category in American society, and we're set up in this way as if we are, in the famous book of the 50s, was Protestant Catholic Jew. We're just not that anymore. And the more we can realize that the Jewish people are not just a religion, but we are something other than that, we will begin creating educational institutions and infrastructures which reflect that. We're sitting in one right now. And the notion of the Jewish people, whatever that means for you, taking on a different type of notion of how to express your Jewishness and your Jewish life is going to be a fundamental challenge for many of us. It is, by the way, related to and really obvious when you explain it, I think, in that way, as to why the issue of Israel has become such a divisive issue amongst many Jews, because it was, for some, it was part of their religious affiliation, and for some it was an add-on. And when we'll talk about it a bit later on, is in many Jewish educational institutions, the treatment of Israel was Yom Yisrael at summer camp, or an elective in a day school, or something that you added on to Jewish education. And one of the things that we're working on now is if you believe Jewish education should be comprehensive, you will include a curriculum which has at its core Torah and history and language and Israel and these things are inextricably linked, and you cannot have one without the other. So in some ways, it's a recategorization of the Jew in American society which requires us to create a new way of looking at education.
Shall we go on to the next one? What are you seeing today in the classroom or in communities, Sivan, with families that give you hope, and what keep you up at night?
If you are in a family that does anything Jewish in your home with children, then you are the thing that is giving me hope in this moment. With your grandchildren, with your children, with other children in your communities, we often think of education as something that happens in institutions, in schools, in camps, and it does. Meaningful education happens in institutions. But meaningful learning for children happens in a million different places. I'd like to, if you go outside there, you'll see a beautiful mosaic. And I think that mosaic is actually a perfect metaphor for how children learn. Children are gathering bits and pieces of information everywhere they are, on the subway, in a book, from the internet, and very powerfully in the homes of their parents and their grandparents. And so if you, in any of your kind of home spaces, non-institutional spaces, are ever celebrating a Jewish holiday, having a Passover Seder, celebrating Shabbat, doing anything Jewish, that is absolutely meaningful and beautiful and a thing that gives me hope. And I have spent the last 2 years watching Jewish children experience great trauma in the wake of October 7th. And I want to explain to you 3 phases that I have watched our children experience as we have seen the hostage crisis evolve. In the immediate days, I have interviewed hundreds upon hundreds of Jewish elementary-age children since October 7th. And in the early days and months, I was hearing children, including children who do not come from deeply Jewishly steeped families, spending an inordinate amount of time and mental energy imagining themselves and their siblings in the tunnels. And sitting with the trauma of the fact that it's not just hostages, but actually Jewish children who were taken as hostages, and what that means for me as a Jewish child who has empathy and can imagine myself and the other Jewish children in my life in the dark tunnels. Once all of the children themselves had been released, there was another phase in Jewish children's thinking that is also a sign of great trauma, and that gives me really a lot of pause because I think we as a community really need to reckon with it. One child I interviewed in New York City, but I heard similar stories from Jews who lived in other cities with a lot of Jews, put it like this: in my city, everywhere, there are hostage posters. And at the beginning, they said hostage, hostage, and that was horrible. But now some of them say dead. And every day, I know on my way to school, I'm going to pass posters. And I play a game with myself. I ask myself, is today a day you want to know bad news? Or is it today a day you want to pretend that everyone's okay? Our children have been holding all of that for 2 years. And now, in this moment where the living hostages are home, we're in a new phase. But that trauma has not gone away magically. And several children have told me, we've been telling you for 2 years already that just when people come home doesn't mean like everyone's okay. So why do people keep saying there's a celebration? Like, I don't feel like everything's okay. And to me, hearing these stories from children in all sorts of Jewish communities, in different states, but who have a shared experience of the collective trauma of the post-October 7th period, makes me worried for the mental health and well-being of our children, and makes me convinced that it is our collective responsibility not to pretend, not to ignore, but to help children process this terrible, terrible moment in Jewish history.
Sivan, what age group are you talking about with those kids you were talking to?
Elementary school.
Elementary school.
Yeah.
Can I pick up on
Yeah.
a bit older middle school and high school kids, especially those that attend non-Jewish day schools, which, by the way, just to get the statistics here, just so we understand, less than 5% of non-Orthodox Jews in America actually send their kids to Jewish day schools. And that's just something like, it's a big reckoning when you're talking about the numbers. So the majority of the kids, when I'm talking about middle school and teenagers, they're in public schools and they're in independent or charter schools, depending on the state. And we used to call it, in some educational circles, I used to call it the Anne Frank moment. What's the Anne Frank moment? It's that time when the kid who's in public school doesn't want to be standing out as Jewish. They just want to be a regular kid. Why do they just want to make friends? They just want to be just like everybody else. But that moment when they're in social studies class or lit class in 10th grade and the teacher brings out Anne Frank, all of a sudden the spotlights go on that kid, and whether you wanted to be the Jew in the class or not, everyone turned to you to be that Jew in the class. And how do you respond to the Anne Frank book? October 7th is that new Anne Frank moment. But the kids who didn't want to be seen as Jewish in that class, or whom Jewish was a peripheral part of their identity and didn't want to be singled out for their religious or ethnic background, depending on how, like, eyes turned on them. And they had to make a split decision in many cases. And often it wasn't a social, it could have come up in a science class or a math class. It came up in really weird, or on the playground. They had to make a split decision as to what am I going to embrace or not embrace. Just another myth. It's not like every single public school in North America was actually teaching some sort of anti-Zionist or anti-Israel rhetoric in those classrooms. We found that most of the teachers were actually trying to avoid the topic completely because they were too scared to even deal with the complexity of what was taking place. But when they did, those Jewish kids had to decide, am I going to stand up and be that Jew in the classroom, or am I going to plead ignorance and say that I have no affinity? Majority of them that we're speaking to, and this is not empirical, but we're finding, at a certain point there was a breaking point for most of them, and they felt a need to have to respond in some way, positively or negatively, but they couldn't remain neutral in many situations.
Raise your hand if your school, your district had a lot of issues regarding October 7th. Issues, questions, debate after October 7th.
So I want to just say that I had a little bit of a different experience post-October 7th. We've actually seen a significant increase in families who desire now to enter into a more immersive, intensive Jewish education. I can't say it's huge numbers, but we used to have a phenomenon where we had kids who would leave Jewish day school after 5th grade and enter into middle school and 6th grade in the public school. We're seeing the opposite now. We have kids who are in public school in 5th grade who are now applying to our school into 6th grade. Which is an interesting phenomenon. And when I ask the parents, what's motivating this, part of it is just the nature of middle school and the concern of that kind of Anne Frank moment, but even more here in California, it's about ethnic studies, what that's going to mean. It's about the concern that peers are going to say things that are really disturbing to them about Israel, about Jews, about Zionism. But there's also a renewed interest in re-engaging in strong Jewish identity formation and education, and it's actually driving more people into immersive Jewish experiences in numbers that I think are significantly different than pre-October 7th. So there's a silver lining in that. I think what keeps me up at night, as someone who ran a Jewish high school for about 20 years, I see the percentage of kids going from 8th grade, whether in public school or in Jewish day school or in private school, into a Jewish high school as being way, way too low in numbers. Because for me, as important is the preschool through 8th grade, and I think it's critically important, and this is the first time I've been leading a TK through 8 school, and I see the impact that it has. I can say the importance of being in a Jewish high school environment. When I was growing up, it also meant being in a Jewish youth group environment in high school, but I think Jewish day schools in particular provide a certain kind of modeling, a certain kind of sophistication about what it means to be Jewish, and the percentage of kids who are going on to Jewish high school I think needs to be strengthened and enhanced in significant ways. Identity formation and the kind of decisions kids are making about their future, what college they go to, how they want to engage in the Jewish community at the high school level is critical. And I think we have an opportunity, if we're creative and innovative, to really expand what Jewish high school education can provide for Jewish students and families.
David, when parents in school have conflicted values around Israel, politics, and so on, how can educators navigate the gap and help parents show the path for their kids?
All right.
Especially about Israel those days, right? There's a whole conversation about it.
Can we go there, October 7th? Can we go there? All right. Look, October 7th changed everything. In terms of Israel is a forever changed country, I believe. I think the Jewish people are for sure forever changed after October 7th, and now the obligation is for Jewish education to adapt accordingly. We can debate it or not debate it in the magnitude, but in my eyes, it's critical. And yet, none of the things that I believe any of us are going to talk about were mysterious to us pre-October 7th. We knew most of these things before, we especially, because I know my colleagues on the panel, but October 7th has given us a coverage to do things that we were never able to do before for whatever reason, and it's given us a sense of urgency. And that urgency is really critical because the moment right now requires some fairly dramatic changes to take place. Look, the number one question I got asked after October 7th was basically some variation of the question, where did Jewish education screw it up, and it wasn't asked that nicely, so badly that so many Jewish students are at the encampments on colleges all around the United States? Now, forgetting the fact that I didn't want to dissect the actual numbers of students who were Jewish who were at the encampments, irrelevant, compared to the number of Jewish students on those same campuses who didn't know what to do, what to say, how to respond, which is 1,000 times more than that. It's the wrong question to have been asking in so many ways for a whole lot of variety of factors. But specifically to your question, you, except for these friends over here, who look statistically younger than a lot of other people in the room. So welcome teenagers to this session. I know it's weird when we're speaking about you, as if you're, but you as adults have had a lifetime of experiences and learning opportunities to come up with your own opinions, beliefs, and values when it comes to everything in your life, including what's taking place in Israel today. If you think the right educational response is either a parent or a teacher or a stakeholder in Jewish education is to make more young people think exactly the same way as you do, then that's no longer education, it's some form of indoctrination at its worst. And anyone who's raised a teenager knows if you try and tell a young person what to think, do, or believe, they're going to, by default, choose exactly the opposite of what you're telling them to do. So the question is not the right question in terms of what do you want them to think, do, or believe when it comes to Israel. The question for all of us to consider as a community is what experiences and educational opportunities do we want to offer the younger generation so that they can reach their own conclusions about all of these issues, even if they might end up disagreeing with you. And the headline there, but the headline there is, okay, I actually don't think the same way as my parents or grandparents either. And by the way, indoctrination or hasbara, not the same thing, but pretty close, hasn't actually worked because many of them are walking the other way anyway. So they might not think like you and they might not even vote like you. But at the end of the day, you have to trust two things. You've got to trust young people and you've got to trust good educational practices. They're the only two ways I know how to respond to that question without the alternative being, if you don't believe exactly like I do, I'm going to send you into excommunication or into some form of alienation, which sounds silly, but that's exactly how a lot of the organized Jewish community is talking right now. If you believe this and this, you no longer belong in my tent. What educational message is that we're sending? So we'll talk a bit about what happens to all those kids that now define themselves as being non-Zionists and anti-Zionists and whether they should or shouldn't be included in our tent. At the end of the day, if you're a teacher, they're still our kids.
Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think we have to provide much more intensive and immersive experiences, and that the families, the parents, the siblings, I think are going to experience incredible growth as a result of the immersive experience that the children have. And I'm thinking specifically about the kind of experiences that we create between American Jewish students and Israeli students. You know, we have Birthright as one model. Many Jewish day schools will send 8th graders for 2 weeks. I think we have to think much more differently about what kind of intensive experiences we have. In this community a bunch of Israeli 18-year-olds who come via the Jewish Agency to spend time in Jewish schools and in other institutions in the Jewish community here in the Bay Area. I see the impact on those Israeli kids, 18-year-olds, just out of high school, who come here and experience a whole different way of thinking about Jewish life and the possibilities of it and what that means for their going back to Israel and bringing some of that experience. At the same time, I think American Jewish students need to have intensive and extensive experience with Israelis. And I think we can do that in a number of ways, which are not just sending kids to Israel, but creating a different kind of set of partnership institutions. And frankly, I think we also need to be able to provide students with global Jewish experiences, because to the extent to which the kids can see different ways of formulating Jewish identity and Jewish community, they're going to have more resources with which to confront what I think David accurately described as a very different reality. That's not necessarily the reality that we grew up with. People my age grew up with an Israel that the American Jewish community experienced very, very differently than what kids are experiencing now, which means that the kind of immersive experiences that we need to give them in order for them to understand the complexity, the nuance, and develop the kind of relationships and partnerships is something imperative right now. And we have to think really in new creative ways about it, because the current structures of the institutions, I think, are built for a different time when the relationship with Israel was easy or can be assumed.
Was it ever easy?
Yeah, it was a lot easier, I can tell you. Growing up here, I'm in my 60s, it was easier.
Historians call that the golden age of American Jewish relationships with Israel. It was a small blip that happened. If you are of the generation where you were a teenager in the Six-Day War, you probably came of age in that golden era. But preceding that golden era and postdating that golden era have been more complicated. But if we think about the senior leadership of many Jewish institutions, they in fact came of age in that golden era. And so the generations that have preceded them haven't had the same, that have come after them, followed them, and preceded them, but in this case followed them, haven't had that same experience of the golden age. And that age has been gone for a very long time, and as David said, way predated October 7th. I want to answer your original question. In the year between October 7th and October 7th, I traveled to over 100 different Jewish school communities across North America. And many schools were imploding because of profound disagreements among parents, among faculty, and among children about the politics of this moment. And when I go into schools, my first answer is, before you talk about Israel, can we talk about how we're going to talk about Israel? We have to actually have ground rules for conversation that center some shared values and shared understanding, shared parameters, or shared norms. And Z3 has beautifully modeled this for all of us today, right? None of the panels have started without saying, we're starting with 3 principles. We want to make them transparent to you. Different school communities can have different core principles, but articulating that to parents, to professionals, to children helps us understand and keep in mind that we are all one Jewish people responsible for one another, and at the very same time, we are politically deeply divided in this moment. And those two things can both be true. And if you and I disagree about Israel-related politics, we can still be in community, but only if we talk about how we're going to talk before we talk.
Sivan, why is it different for Israel than any other? Like, what you described to me is like, that is just good educational practice. Like, regardless of the issue, like, good education should confront some of the most controversial topics of our day. If it doesn't, I think we're just deluding ourselves that we're having a real impact. But we are, and we do it. It seems like we can discuss any topic in the Jewish world. When it comes, the classic example, like, you're teaching in a school and you've got a whole lot of atheists that come out and say, I proudly don't believe there's a God, and you've got a whole lot of kids that, no, there is a theology. You would think that's like the number one. If we can't agree on God, what have we got in common? Yeah. But when it comes to Israel, there are different rules at play.
Yeah. So I do a lot of work studying Jewish educators, and for years I've heard Jewish educators make exactly the same point that you're making. For example, we can study the documentary hypothesis, the idea that human beings and not God wrote the Torah, because it's only, I'm quoting now, these are not my words, it's only Torah, but Israel has a different level of sacred. And that is so interesting and so in many ways backwards to the ways that Jews have for much of Jewish history thought about what counts as sacred. But I think you're right, that people are willing to let all sorts of questions, we are a people who loves questions, questioning flourish, and as external pressures from the rest of the external world are bearing down more and more on the Jewish community, and especially on the segment of the Jewish community that feels deeply connected to Israel, the more that becomes difficult.
But it's much easier to do in a school setting. When it's your kid at home that has a very different idea than you are, what do you do as a parent? Like, I'm sure many parents have experienced that in various of topic, but Israel and the war and after October 7, things have extreme. So any advice for parents that are in the room?
Well, so all three of my kids went to Jewish schools through high school. They did a gap-year program in Israel. We lived in Israel for a year on sabbatical. And yet, my kids have different views from each other, especially post-October 7th. They certainly have different views than me and my wife. And I think what we try to do, I don't know how successfully, to be honest, is to really have an atmosphere of respectful debate. We actually do around the table, and it comes up and it gets uncomfortable. It really does get uncomfortable. I've been with groups of my kids' friends, they're in their late 20s, early 30s, and have had very, very passionate debates about what our response should be to Israel's response to October 7th, and how do we think about all of the political and international relations implications to this. But I think we have to develop within schools, within families, within synagogues, within communities, like here at the JCC. As Sivan said, I think we need to have certain ways that we conduct our conversations. And we have a tradition which really values machloket, values debate. There's a sense that actually allows us to be able to hold multiplicity. That, I think, by the way, I think that's our secret sauce as Jews. What we have to contribute to the world is the ability to be able to hold difference and complexity. It's baked into our tradition, and we have to model that. We have to model it within our conversations around the table, and we have to model it in our institutions. And it's not easy. It's not easy to hear people, especially within the family unit, saying things that really go against our fundamental commitments and values. But as David pointed out, and as Sivan said as well, I think we need to be sensitive to the generational differences of what kids and young adults are growing up with, what they're experiencing, what the pressures are. I mean, what they're experiencing on college campuses is so different from what my generation experienced. And even my 33-year-old, what he experienced at Columbia University is so different from what kids are experiencing now at Columbia University, even though it had its issues then too. So I think we have to be really sensitive to that, but we also have to create certain fundamental norms of how we conduct our conversations, even at the dining room table.
David, when it comes to, go ahead, sorry. Sivan.
This is a yes and comment. And it also matters what age your child is. So if you have a teen or a tween, my advice to you is bring it on. There is nothing that you can say, my dear tween or teen, that is going to rattle me. Absolutely, you get to have your own idea. Absolutely, you get to push back on me. That, in fact, is your job developmentally. I would be really worried if you were parroting my own beliefs, because then you wouldn't be doing the job that a teen and tween is doing. But that's not going to break our relationship. And I'm going to listen with curiosity to your ideas, and I will calmly and clearly articulate mine and the values that undergird it. Because even if in this moment you say a thing that does not align with my politics, I'm actually not convinced that you'll still think that same thing in 3 weeks, let alone 3 months. You might, in which case I will say to you, bring it on. You're doing your job as a teenager, and I'm going to do my job as a parent. But if you have a child that is younger than 4th grade, then I see it very differently, because I don't think your kid is making a political comment in the same way, especially about Israel. I've been following Jewish children and conducting a longitudinal study since the year 2012. The kids, I started studying them when they were 5-year-old kindergartners, and all of them are now college freshmen. And I've been following these kids for a very long time to understand how it is that people change and develop over time. And one of the things that I've noticed is there's actually developmental stages to when kids begin to develop a political ideology. And kids, maybe 3rd grade, but below that, they might say a thing that to an adult ear sounds wildly politically radical and isn't intended as such.
David, go ahead.
No, I'm fascinated. Just hear the example that you would give.
Of that one? Yeah, okay. So I told you I spent a lot of time in the first year after October 7th going to different school communities. And in one community I went into, a parent came to me quite distraught. I'm so sorry that I'm going to have to swear right now. But she said that her 2nd grader came home from public school with a piece of art that said, "Fuck Palestine" on it. And this is a politically liberal parent, and she was triply horrified. First of all, why is my 2nd grader using absolutely inappropriate language? Second of all, that is not how I would like my child to talk about Palestine or Palestinians. I would like to try and, I am a liberal Democrat, and I would like to kind of convey to my child that there are multiple peoples with claims to a land. So why is my child saying what I experience to be a radically right-wing position? Yeah. And I said, hey, did you ask your child? What is the story behind this piece of art that you came home with? And the child said, well, I heard that something bad happened and that Jews were killed. Also, someone on the school bus said it was Palestine that did that, and that's the worst word I know. And what I meant to say was, it's really bad that Jews died. Kids below a certain age don't have the same sort of political valence that teenagers and tweens and adults have. And that is also developmentally appropriate. So to those children, I also say, bring it on. Bring it on. I can handle it. I am your loving adult. We're going to get through this together.
Yeah. So I want to pick up on, if I can.
Yes, and then we'll move to a different question.
Yeah, from the older kids as well, especially. And this is, I think Danny's right in terms of machloket l'shem shamayim, the arguments for the sake of heavens, and ilu v'ilu being this voice and that voice to better the argument. And yet there have to be limits. I think there have to be limits in this discussion that we as educators need to present. So when I was teaching back in a day school many years ago, one of my limits in a classroom was I had to have some parameters for the Israel-Palestine or the Israel-Arab conflict in the conversation was, if the statement is allowed in the Knesset, then it's acceptable in my classroom. I figured if people were voted by the Israeli electorate to say something, then it's acceptable. Oh, and they said, and no one questioned it then. But if I apply that today, and by the way, I have other rules in my classroom or my camp, which include no racism, no incitement to violence, no bullying. Hang on a second, those two things no longer match. Because if you want to find racism, incitement to violence, and bullying, just go to any Knesset session. And here I think we need to have some bit of a hard truth about American Jewry and about Israeli society and the Israeli political structure. And I say this knowing that this week marks the 30th anniversary of the assassination of Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, which for me was probably the most formative Israel experience in my life prior to October 7th. And even then we were talking about ahavat sinam and a senseless hatred and all of these things before. You need to understand now, if I talk to a young person about Yitzhak Rabin or Yasser Arafat, I might as well be talking about Herzl or Ben-Gurion, because it's a historical thing. Now, when they say they don't know these characters, just remember what that also means. It means they don't know peace. Peace is not a construct in their mind that's actually possible or plausible, because for the last 30 years of their existence, when they came to consciousness, and here I'm going to say things which are going to offend some people, and it's not a partisan comment, the only government that they have known in Israel with a couple of years blip is a right-wing, some would say extremist government with values antithetical to where the vast majority of North American Jews center their primary value proposition in life. Whether you like that or don't like that, or you want to disagree with the numbers or not, you need to understand that 75% of Americans, maybe it will blip up or down, are voting Democrats for a whole lot of reasons unrelated, even in New York, unrelated to the Middle East conflict. They value the universal notion of what it means to be an American living in this free society, and anything that curtails that piece of freedom for all, universal brotherhood, equality for all, is going to mess with their outlook on the world. And I've got news for you. And this is not a political statement, but it is for the young person today who gets the bulk of their news and media through social media, that what is the most antithetical notion for those values that I just described as progressive? It's the occupation. We need to understand that why so many of our young Jews are now declaring themselves to be against what's taking place in Israel, and even using labels like anti-Zionism and non-Zionist, is the result of 30 years of a growing dividing gap between these two populations, to the point where the word Zionism has lost value and meaning inherently for the vast majority of Jews that we're talking about. And I'll just say this because it's really critical to understand. Why has Zionism become a word that this population cannot assimilate into their own consciousness? It's not because, I don't believe, or not just because, there are a whole lot of anti-people out there saying Zionism is an apartheid, genocidal, colonial entity or national enterprise. It's because the only voices they're hearing from the Israelis on their social media feeds, Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, are declaring their Zionism to be something antithetical to the values which they want to adopt in their life. Why I say this now is because this is now a fault of Jewish education. That if we can't reclaim what Zionism is for the plurality of the Jewish people, because I'll tell you something, every person that I've encountered who calls themselves a non-Zionist, anti-Zionist is somewhat different, a non-Zionist would feel very much at home on any Saturday night at a protest in Tel Aviv. They are in my camp. And the fact that they don't want to enter into it because I've got an Israeli flag waving and they see it as something else, that's on us, the educational fraternity, to turn it around to something else. And I think, without trying to be too political, too partisan, we need to understand the sociological makeup of Israeli Jewry and American Jewry moving in very distinct, numerically different directions.
Okay, so now let's go tachlis. Let's solve that.
Yeah.
Try to solve it. So if you wave a magic wand and want to create a Jewish community in the next 20 years, what do we need to do and how should it look like in 20 years? And you have the power to do whatever you want.
It's dangerous.
And all the money in the world. Who is taking it first? All of you need to think about it too. What do we want to see in 20 years? You know we have issues right now. We all know we need to solve them. But where do we want to go?
Well, I'll start. I think we have to create some new Jewish educational institutions, because clearly the number of people, families, students, who are engaged in immersive, intensive Jewish educational experiences is too low. And I think we're going to have to figure out what kinds of institutions, what kind of programs, what kind of educational settings are going to be attractive in this moment, in this generation, to folks. I don't know whether that's going to require different kinds of Jewish day schools, whether it's going to require Jewish universities that haven't been developed, whether it's going to require international programs, new kinds of gap year experiences. But I think we're going to have to really tackle the question, if we don't have a critical mass of American Jewish young people who are engaged in immersive, intensive Jewish experiences, I think we're going to be in real trouble, especially given all the forces that are at play in the broader community and the kind of lack of relationships with Zionism that are positive for reasons that I agree with David, I think exist. And I think we're going to have to think creatively about what kind of structures, other than the structures that we currently have, are going to be able to provide a different set of opportunities and experiences and create the kind of nuance and sense of complexity that we want without all of the outside forces determining that on us.
Sivan, think about the students in 20 years.
Well, if I had a magic wand, I would, magically raise a generation of Hebrew literate, Jewishly literate children who know how to read text and know Jewish history and think in sophisticated ways about politics, all sorts of good things. But I want to caution all of us in thinking that Jewish education alone can solve the problems that we're facing, especially because a much bigger force in children's lives is the public square of the internet. And we don't control discourse on the internet. And no magic wand of mine is going to create the kind of Jewish conspiracy in which Jews do control that. So, a lot of what children, especially teens and tweens, are dealing with today is the fact that not only does information come from the internet, but the discourse on the internet is overtly hostile. And I would also like to wave a magic wand and fix that problem. But in absence of fixing that problem, we cannot expect Jewish educators, Jewish schools, Jewish camps to suddenly create in a vacuum a generation that doesn't have to contend with that kind of hostility.
Yeah.
David, what is the most bold initiative?
Can I get a magic wand?
You want a magic wand or the bold initiative?
I get a bold initiative,
You
not a
get
magic
bold,
wand.
both of them. You can have a magic wand. Go ahead.
No, I was going to go down the path that Sivan went down in terms of the AI stuff specifically. After the 2018 Gaza war, that was, a whole lot of parents came to me and said, I want the Jewish Education Project to lead a campaign to ban Jewish students from accessing social media so that way they would be protected from all of the anti-Israel stuff that's coming their way. I said, bad idea. And then they said, why don't we fund a whole lot of social media influencers to create counter social media on TikTok so that our kids would see the Jewish influences and they'd be swayed. Bad idea. 20 years' time, the best thing we can do is help our young people discern good from bad or right from wrong when it comes to social media, because it still is the #1 place where they are getting most of their information about what's taking place in the Middle East. You give me 20 years, I'm not sure I can do it in 20 years. I think one of the real secrets of a good Israel education or a good Jewish education which has Israel being integral to it and not a side thing, is actually the impact it's going to have on Israeli society. And I want to take Danny's mention of mifgashim, or encounters, or immersive experiences, one step further. Without even realizing it, I think Israelis, or at least the Israelis that I know and like, are craving, especially since October 7th, with a greater strength of positive energy between Jewish communities in Israel and outside of Israel, and a new recognition that the 20% of Israel's population that is not Jewish are part and parcel of what we call, and they call, Goral Yisrael, the destiny of the Jewish people together. And it's incumbent upon us to actually understand that we're in this together, and we need to find better ways of improving each other. And I think there's a lot of humility that's going to be necessary for Jewish and Israel education here, and certainly in Israel as well.
So we talked about the students. Now let's talk about the leaders. We have 10 more minutes.
10.
Well, if you want to leave time for questions.
Do we want to leave time for questions?
I love questions.
You have to. Okay, so we'll ask that, and then we'll take a few questions. What about the leaders that we are cultivating right now? What tools they need? What do we need to do in the Jewish world to give them those tools?
I think, as Sivan and David both said, I think one of the tools is to understand the influence and the opportunity that exists in digital information, whether it's social media or it's AI and digital learning. I think there's going to have to be a real attempt by leadership to understand how we can provide opportunities for those digital media to support the kind of Jewish culture we want to create. And I think there's all kinds of experimentation that's going on, but AI is going to have a significant influence on education, on our whole culture, on all kinds of fields and careers. And I think the leadership of the next generation is really going to have to immerse themselves in both the challenges and opportunities, the ethical issues that presents. That's one thing. The other thing I would say is I think we're going to have to think globally. And I think the leadership is going to have the kind of experiences of Jews, both here in the United States and in Israel and throughout the diaspora, in order to create global Jewish experiences for kids and for adults.
Great.
Awesome.
I'd say the following. I've been to too many Jewish organizations when, if you want to sit around the main table, you need to be of a certain age. And if you're of another age, they send you down the corridor to the young people's department, or next gen. No offense to any of your organizations that haven't. Well, I guess it is offensive. Look, we just had a 34-year-old, like him or not like him, elected mayor of New York. And in the Jewish community, they would be put onto the young leadership cabinet. These young folks in the audience, some of whom I can see, and the other, are literally able to change the world in any other sector which they want to apply themselves to, except in the Jewish community. We have got guardrails up because we're too scared that they're going to take us in a path that we don't necessarily agree with or doesn't conform to where we want them to be or reflect our values and attitudes. And I got news for everybody. Jewish community has changed every generation over time because people have decided to adapt, evolve, rebel, whatever it might be. The notion that we have not changed for 3,000 years is just a fallacy of Jewish history and Jewish education. So my message to leadership would be, trust the young people. They will continue to rise and not disappoint you in the ways that they will, because ultimately it's going to be the world which they're running and not the one we want them to be running.
Absolutely. With that being said, I know that we said that there are a few young people in the audience. Do you guys want to ask us questions? We want to hear from the young people. We also want to hear from everyone else, but let's start with someone. Anyone has a specific question? Go ahead. Can you stand? Oh.
Mm-hmm. So one question I had, I know we're focusing more about educating Jewish individuals. What about like educating individuals who are not Jewish so that they like understand the culture, like help prevent anti-Semitism?
Great, thank you.
Great question.
Repeat the question. Repeat the question for the
Sorry?
The question was, what are we doing about non-Jewish students? How do we increase their education about the Jewish people so that there's less anti-Semitism in the world? We actually do a lot of work now with the public schools in New York, and it's a really important part of what we're actually doing, and we think it's really, really important in many ways. I do need to say here that one of the big shocks after October 7th for the Jewish world was the feeling that we were abandoned by the allies and the people that we had been partners with and got behind. And I think that is a reckoning that the Jewish community is still coming to terms with of who stood up with us in our moment of time. I do think October 7th has taken the Band-Aid off a lot of latent anti-Semitism which is now present. And I might just be naive here, I fundamentally believe that most Americans, I actually think globally, we can talk about Europe as a separate thing, but most Americans actually believe in the equality and freedom of all people to be able to express their religious and ethnic and their racial, whatever it might be, pride in significant ways. And my colleague Zohar Raviv talks about we need to start listening more to the silent majority rather than the noisy minority. I might be naive, and I don't want to dismiss anti-Semitism at all, but I think we need to really shine a light on the places where things are going right, acknowledging that the extremes on both the right and the left are taking us into some pretty dark places, but I remain more optimistic in general than some of my other colleagues on this one.
Let's take one more question. It's hard to see. Do you mind to stand and really project your voice? How it will look.
30 seconds.
Actually, I think Danny can answer this perfectly. Danny.
No, I can't answer it perfectly because I believe in Jewish day schools. And even though I experienced supplemental school, Hebrew school, congregational schools growing up, I don't have a vision for supplemental schools that I would claim would respond to the current needs. So I'm not qualified really to answer that question. Other people are.
Sivan, do you have any ideas? David?
To me, the answer to that is not one model. A flourishing of different ideas that will attract different types of children from different types of families. And in fact, I think there are all sorts of beautiful Hebrew school alternative models that are happening right now. Some that are trying to make Hebrew school more like camp, some that are trying to make Hebrew school more like adult text study. And those are just two examples. To me, if we have a large diffuse system of Jewish education with no central agency, and a lot of the times that is a negative, but in this case, in thinking about the future of supplementary school education, I think it's a positive because I think the best ones will win out.
So, I'll just say, can I say, like,
go ahead.
Quickly, one response to your question is, yes, by and large, the model of congregational supplementary school is not working in many places. Why? Because it's set up as an infrastructure to graduate as many kids by the age of bar or bat mitzvah, built on an economic model by the clergy and the executive directors of synagogues, and not designed primarily to give young people an education which allows them to thrive in the world today. What that means, by the way, can be translated in many different ways. But for example, if you asked a young family today, what do you need Jewishly in order to succeed in the world today, if you're coming from one of those places? I can guarantee the curriculum would look very, very different to what currently exists in many places. That's a model which needs to be broken to recognize that training a whole lot of kids to recite a few blessings in a language which they barely understand is not the language which they actually need to succeed. I mean language in the broader sense, in the other aspects of their life. So choices are going to need to be made. And I don't want to throw it all out, because what Sivan is saying is completely correct. But here's where you need to trust educators, because I'll tell you one thing. Every educator that I have met in the last 2 years has said something very similar. We know what to do, but the powers around us are not allowing us, for whatever reason, to conduct the educational processes that we know are necessary in today's time. So I'm happy to pick it up with you, but I do think it's a big question of our time.
So for our last question before we leave today, in one sentence, what gives you hope about Jewish education? Does anything give you hope today?
Well, the young students I see every day give me hope, because there's such joy in their experience of Jewish life and connection to Jewish community and to Israel. They come home singing. They develop Hebrew as a real resource for them, and they have a love of Jewish texts and Jewish traditions. So what I see, at least within my setting, which is, again, a limited setting, gives me a lot of hope that the students have and will continue to fall in love with Judaism, Jewish community, Jewish people, and Israel.
To me, the answer is the teachers. It is very hard to be a teacher. It was very hard before COVID. Then COVID hit. Then October 7th hit. If there is a teacher who is still going in a lower paying job than they probably could have in another sector into classrooms with young people, that is such a blessing. And we are all the beneficiaries of great teachers.
And if you want to learn about a way to solve that, Early J is really investing heavily in educators and their salaries.
And I would just say one thing. Please do not mistake critique as a lack of hope or as a lack of optimism. And I would say that anybody involved in Jewish education or education in general, by definition, is hopeful, because the ultimate purpose of Jewish education and education in general is to impact the lives of individuals to ultimately make, what I said in the very beginning, their lives better, the communities in which they live richer, and ultimately to make the world a better place. And that is the hopeful message for all of us.
I want to thank our panelists for coming and talking to us. I also want to thank you and ask you to take one idea, something that sparked you today, and take it to your community and make a change. Tell them that we need this change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later.